Now that we've discussed Homeland Security.
Right.
All right, so
let's move on to trauma.
Would you like to introduce trauma, Mary?
Sure. So the Dahmer series on Netflix right now is receiving blowback from two very different groups.
Very different.
One, the families of Dahmer's victims, who claim that they are re-traumatized by the content in the show.
Actual trauma, not
Yes.
fake trauma that actors drum up to sound good in interviews,
Yeah.
where I say trauma
It's the
and make fun of
degradation
them.
of that word.
This is actual trauma.
And secondly, LGBT viewers who are offended that the show is tagged as LGBT on Netflix.
Because
Jeffrey Dahmer was gay.
It's not the representation we want. It's the representation we need right now. I don't know. Like it's like basically you don't get to choose what your representation is all the time. Trust me.
It's like it's they want representation, but only if it means that they're valorized
on their terms.
Yeah.
Yep.
And no, it can never be anything but entirely positive.
Which is unrealistic.
You can never be portrayed as a villain, and even if it's a historical fact,
gotta change it.
You have to change it
Actually,
or silence it.
That would be really funny if they were like, if they start being the ones to push back and say, we don't want this character to be gay.
You know, they're going to make Jeffrey Dahmer straight and rewrite history so that all of his victims were female.
Yeah.
Like, I was playing on Steam and...
Well, like... It's interesting. My issue with the Dahmer series really is that they should have stopped with the My Friend Dahmer film that starred Ross Lynch from Disney, actually.
Did you watch the one with Zac Efron?
The Ted Bundy one?
Yeah,
I did. I watched that one too, and I thought that one was actually better than My Friend Dahmer.
Okay.
But both were really interesting.
There will never be a shortage of fascination with you ladies will always keep it's women, man. They love true crime.
I don't think that true crime is generally that interesting. I found it interesting to watch former Disney stars switch their career path over to playing more serious roles and dark stories. The My Friend Dahmer film was more interesting to me also because it covered Jeffrey Dahmer's life before he started killing people.
Yeah.
Like it showed his upbringing, it showed his friendships, and who he was known as before.
The memes of like they were a happy family until they weren't, and then it just makes the image negative or black. Like it inverts the image.
The way Ross Lynch played Dahmer, I think it showed. It did show how his sexual orientation was repressed, just like everything else he repressed.
Yeah.
So it is relevant to his character.
So it says on Thursday, a Twitter user named Eric, who is Isabel's cousin, tweeted about the series and that a scene in particular says, quote, I know true crime media is huge right now, but if you're actually curious about the victims, my family, the Isabels, are pissed off about the show, Eric wrote. It's re-traumatizing over and over again for what? How many movies, shows, documentaries do we need? I kind of fall weirdly... Like, a lot of times I'll read articles that say, like, how many of this do we need? And I get annoyed because it's always written in a snarky way. But there is a question of like...
It is true.
Well, I don't know if it's true, but I do say, how many times do you think you can do it and actually do it well, right? Like, is the one you're making actually going to become the seminal work of this person?
Yeah, are you improving on what has already been done?
Yeah.
That's the question. But because true crime is trendy right now and... dramatizing real stories is a lot easier than writing a fake story of your own.
They're like, look, we've made 5 shows about criminal women this year. We got to do at least one guy. They're like, who can we do? They're like, Dahmer. Oh yeah, that guy. We can do him.
Yeah,
that's what they do. Then the Menendez brothers get one every few years as well.
Yeah. So this Twitter user is saying he has to watch a recreation of his cousin having an emotional breakdown in court in the face of the man who tortured and murdered her brother. And
which, by the way, that likeness is uncanny.
Yeah.
They flip the hair, but other than that,
I mean, don't watch it.
Yeah.
What do you want me to say?
Well, he said he's not telling anyone what to watch.
At the very
but he's just pointing out that it is kind of insane,
It
right?
is.
Like, it's an insane situation that someone would see their family's trauma dramatized and made into a product. That is a crazy thing. Like, it's right to point it out.
It's weird how that's like
It's not a call for censorship.
No, but it's a genre in and of itself. It's a cynical one. I mean, they had an Astroworld documentary made within like the first 6 weeks of it happening.
Yeah,
like there is a market for that type of stuff for people who are just more I mean, I have to admit, if I'm watching it, I'm not going to be feeling particularly good or bad about it.
I think it's more that he's trying to point out that it's hypocritical for them to say that they are making this series with respect to victims, honoring the dignity of the families. He said, my cousins wake up every few months at this point with a bunch of calls and messages, and they know there's another Dahmer show. It's cruel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you get away from it?
Contacting these people is completely out of line.
But didn't they also say in this that they weren't contacted or offered money?
Well, it's sort of like either way, what would it be better to contact them and offer them money,
or to not contact them
or would
at all
it be
and make
better
it all anyways?
Yeah, to not contact them at all and make it, if that's what
I
you
think
have
they should,
to do.
because
you know?
if they're gonna give it like a particularly dramatic rendition of their character, I don't know. It's kind of messed up. Someone acting on your behalf and portraying your emotions on film. You know, that would disturb me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I would say that that's more on the moral side. They're not obligated to do it. That's for sure. But
with a lot of true crime stories, the stakes are lower. Like Inventing Anna is so, like, you can make a show about that and make it lighthearted and corny and dramatize it beyond, and make it more fictionalized.
Well, and then they ran into trouble with that.
Well, and then even then they had legal issues, getting accused of defamation, but the seminal character in it, she in real life doesn't care because the stakes are lower.
Also remember that it's kind of an aside, but that the focus of the first ever episode of Serial got out recently because of overturned evidence. They found exculpatory evidence about the guy who was convicted of that crime. I forget his name, but he was let out of jail, and they pointed out in that first ever episode of Serial that there was inconsistencies in the case, and that guy just got out of jail.
Oh, was that Saeed?
Saeed, I forget. I forget his last name. But yeah, he got out of jail. So true crime is not going anywhere. And
I do agree that it's the female audience that drives the demand for that, and then like still predominantly a male audience that drives the demand for movies based on comics.
Why do chicks watch that?
True crime?
Yeah.
None of us guys are coming into your true crime space saying, hey, let's change this. It needs to be more guy oriented. Am I right?
Women
Hot
like
chicks.
Women. First of all, yes, there is a faction of true crime fans who romanticize the killers, and that's gross. Yeah. But then if you look at like just overall the mainstream appeal to it, I think it's that women enjoy almost like it's a soap opera, looking into investigating the motivations behind monstrous acts, and especially there is an untapped demand to see women committing crimes and showing their capacity for monstrousness, because in fictional stories women have been portrayed primarily as blameless heroes, Mary Sues, women who are strong and make up for the mistakes of men constantly. But then in the real stories, like The Dropout about Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah.
In real stories, you see how they use their strengths, like emotional manipulation, to hurt people and to lie and to run scams.
I had a really interesting take by an ex once of why chicks watch these shows.
Okay.
And her take was that in life, people seldom get justice. And these shows, they're really gruesome, but in the end, they get caught.
Sort of like SVU?
Essentially.
Because we were also talking about SVU and how that's been criticized for giving viewers an unrealistic portrayal of the likelihood that victims can get justice, because it rarely happens in the real world, and it gives people an
we used to watch Criminal Minds together.
Love that show still too.
Right.
I also want to put
those shows are accused of giving people false favorable ideas about law enforcement and about the possibility for justice.
Is it also that there's like when women commit monstrous acts, it tends to not be the same kind of easy to follow narrative? Like what Elizabeth Holmes does or what somebody does with emotional manipulation is a lot different than a purely violent act, even though a lot of it can have ruining someone's life financially can absolutely lead someone to off themselves
or reputation.
It's indirect, and they're usually motivated by greed and by pride and by envy.
It's like the girl who accused the two like Duke basketball players of R-wording her, and then like when they found out that they didn't do it, she like laughed and like scoffed at the judge who gave her like a year in jail.
Yeah, where's the true crime story about that?
She like rolled her eyes at the judge when he gave her a year sentence, and that to me is every bit as like those dudes' lives are over. They were scholarship basketball players. If I remember correctly, they were scholarship athletes whose lives are now never going to be the same again. And her response is to laugh.
They didn't even get invited back to the school, I think.
No. So I mean, and they wouldn't have gotten the scholarship back anyways because they'd been past their prime age, right? So it's like that is every bit as awful and monstrous. Just because you didn't end their life physically does not mean you didn't end their life in some fashion.
Yeah, so I think there is a largely untapped demand for stories where women are the villains, and if you have to draw upon real stories rather than fictionalized ones,
because they don't want to make the fictionalized ones,
then that's what will be made. That's what people will watch.
That's also really interesting because Hollywood doesn't want to make women the villains in movies and stuff like that for social justice reasons. Then there's like this weird cottage industry of people. But we've got real chicks over here that were awful. We can do that.
And even if you make a movie about a fictional female villain, you have to show how she's actually the sympathetic character.
Somebody says it was Lacrosse that they played. So.
Yeah, Duke Lacrosse.
Was it Duke? Okay. That story was so long ago that...
they also memory hold a bunch of details about it.
Well, and that's the other thing. The less attention something gets, the harder it is to remember. Like, a lot of times, like, when something bad happens, the kid who was just hit... The kid was just hit in the car by the crazy dude over the political argument. I had to like write that kid's name down, and even now off the top of my head, I don't remember it off the top of my head. But I remember like when these things happen, because it's not. Yeah, everyone remembers Kyle Rittenhouse's name, but nobody remembers the stories going the other way because they're not publicized widely. So it's a problem.
Yeah, and I suppose people could be worried about dramatized retelling of a story like Jeffrey Dahmer's because there is that faction of true crime fans that romanticize killers and they sympathize with them and their motivations. But I feel like if that's not the intent of the creators, then how can they be blamed for the way that a small fraction of the viewership takes?
Well, that's the thing now. Like now, like
interprets it. There's
a really good. I don't remember if it's Morgan Freeman or Denzel Washington. Basically says like when the beauty of art is like once you make it, it's in the hands of the audience. The problem is now they want to both make it and control how the audience perceives a lot of things. But in the end, it really is up to the audience to take your. It's kind of like the Matrix and the concept of the red pill, right? That got completely taken to mean whatever the cultural zeitgeist wanted it to mean, and then Wachowski spent the last 5 to 10 years trying to walk that back and say that it meant something else.
And like it doesn't belong to you anymore.
No, it does not. You've put it out into the public consciousness.
You should be grateful that it had so much of an impact at all.
Yep.
To mean something that you didn't intend, right?
So it says, so here it is, Netflix slammed for LGBTQ. They tagged the movie with that tag on it. And it says, Netflix's Jeffrey Dahmer series has caused quite a stir for its gruesome subject matter. And now it's done the same for some viewers who have noticed it was given an LGBTQ tag. Well, isn't that the actual purpose of a tag, right? To label the content what it actually is. Mm-hmm. And technically, the subject matter does fit there. It's just gruesome. It's a gruesome adaptation of that subject matter. It's kind of like they talk about how like gay horror is like a thing, and like you can't do it though now because
Is
you can't.
it?
Well, like they had the
What,
one
like
with
Silence
Kevin
of the
Bacon,
Lambs?
the one
I
with
don't
Kevin
know.
Bacon at the conversion camp.
Oh,
the thing, a lot of it's
yes,
predictable because in a lot of the internet it's called the bury your gays trope, meaning that they kill those characters off. So you can't kill the characters off, which eliminates a lot of the actual ability to have drama, because if you know that due to social sensitivities, they're not going to dare kill these characters off lest they be called names. There's not any actual danger to those characters.
And it's absolutely true that like Jeffrey Dahmer, his existence and his life and what he did to young boys and men, it runs directly in the face of the narrative right now, which is that if you are belonging to a certain identity group, that you are blameless.
Yeah, so it says the show in question is Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, a dramatization of the prolific serial killer and cannibal who was convicted of the brutal killings of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. The Dahmer has been explored in many documentaries, films, books, and news articles in the past. One detail about his crimes that is often overlooked is the fact that many of his victims are LGBTQ and POC. Rashad Robinson, consulting producer on the show and president of Color of Change, said the show aims to tell the story of the victims and the impact that Dahmer and local leaders' compliance had on their communities. It's perhaps the reason why Netflix tagged the show as LGBTQ content, a decision that hasn't gone down well with viewers. So a TikTok user named Liz says this is not the representation we're looking for. Another says that she was livid and flabbergasted about the issue, highlighting the show as being tagged as LGBTQ plus horror. She said, I feel like horror implies a certain level of fiction and whimsy that is entirely non-existent and inappropriate for the situation. There is maybe something to be said about maybe you should say non-fiction horror. Horror doesn't feel like the right tag.
Semantics.
But it's also it's a dramatized version of it. So
it's horror. Technically
it's horror. But I think this is the internet, so everything comes down to semantics and transcribed thoughts. They highlighted that LGBTQ tag saying it associates us with a literal serial unaliver, cannibal, and amongst other things, and I'm not sure I can say on this app. So unfortunately, there's an argument to be made that like it's not like they put straight every time there's a straight serial killer, because that's the default for that's the societal norm, the average.
But that's precisely why.
But if you want, but as these companies make more Black History Month, elevate Black voices, Latinx content, they live to make these subgroups to make content easier to find. So unfortunately, this is just an example of one time you don't like what the tag is because it runs counter to what you believe the narrative should be.
My issue with representation is the same issue I tend to have with diversity and with other catch-all terms.
Yeah.
No, sorry, more so than diversity, with tolerance. It's that the real definition of the word gets stretched so much. For example, tolerance is, you shouldn't define a word with a definition, but it is to like to tolerate. It's to be like, I don't really love it, but okay.
Actually, we've kind of come to think tolerance means something more positive than it actually does.
It doesn't.
It literally is the bare minimum
That's
to
what I mean.
coexist with someone without direct conflict happening. Like you are tolerating something that you dislike.
Yeah. But usually in modern day, tolerance is misappropriated and and confused for reverence. Mm-hmm. And people's like, oh, we would just want you to be tolerant. No, you want me to be reverent of you. You want me to really...
Yeah, because you'd be bad if you just tolerated something.
Correct.
Yeah.
And representation is definitely another one of those. So to be represented is there is a thing and someone of your demographic is in it. It's not... when convenient, right? This would be an incredible case of representation because it doesn't behoove you to be represented in this matter in a way. So
not complaining would go a long way. Like,
yeah,
no, follow me. Okay, like every time there's a certain level of like whenever like you hear a story where like if you're for God forsake a CNN viewer who sees something that Fox says that you agree with, you're automatically like you get a positive feeling, or the other way if you're a Fox News person who hears something that CNN says and you're like, oh, okay, that was actually reasonable for once. Both sides could actually gain a lot more traction by being more fair to the other side, but nobody does it. So you gain a lot more traction by saying he's not exactly the representation we're looking for, but it is a true story.
Well, it's not Jeffrey Dahmer really who is the representation
of your group.
It's the fact that all of his victims were LGBT.
Yeah.
So you can't act like that's not a significant part of the story.
And if
they said you take the bad along with the good, the Dahmer case is a part of LGBT history, and it's important that people know he got away with so much. You are still, contributing to representation then.
Wouldn't the argument be that we were actually less biased back in the day when that wasn't an important part of it, when he was just a bad person who did bad things and nobody looked to further like what they're saying is they're saying you're going to label us by labeling this content as LGBTQ, which looks bad on us.
Yeah,
right?
They're preempting the worst possible interpretation.
Whereas back in the day, they wouldn't have it would have been part of the story, but it wouldn't have been the focus.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't have mattered. So
and it's not insignificant. Like it is definitely something you have to recognize and don't deny it. But
yeah, maybe this is the insistence of representation catching up on you.
Yeah, that's what it's like. It's finally happening in a way that you don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
So maybe
once
that's
you're fully assimilated, then you are going to be represented in media the same way everyone else is.
Maybe your best argument is for things to be the way they were, in the sense that it wasn't the most important part of his character or of who he was.
If you just completely have an issue with any representation that's negative, then just say that.
Yeah.
Say that and don't be intellectually dishonest about it.
Yep.
Just say that it makes you uncomfortable that Jeffrey Dahmer is being represented on Netflix, in a series on Netflix that a lot of people are going to see, and you're afraid that people are going to label all gay people as cannibals, deviants, dangerous, which obviously is ridiculous. Yep. But if that's what you're afraid of, just say that.
Yep.
Don't lie about it.
So we can mock you accordingly for your stupid opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like that you've got your way for a long time as far as like wanting to be represented this way, wanting to be represented that way. Then when they just because Netflix doesn't understand, it's a company, it's an algorithm basically. They don't understand the context of adding it to this and not that and not this, right? So it always falls back. Mm-hmm. Thanks for watching this clip, guys. If you want to see full episodes or follow us on social media, links are in the description below. Bye.